Excellent. Well, welcome everybody. Bienvenue, Ani Boujou. My name is Dr. Christina Semeniuk, and I am the director of FishCAST. This is an NSERC Create training program, training the next generation of scientists in both freshwater fisheries, conservation, and management. I'm looking outside my window, and I'm so grateful to be here enjoying the sunshine with my windows open. In beautiful Windsor, Essex County, which is the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations, which include the Ojibwa, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi peoples. And our FishCAST program is really a community, and this is what we're striving for. And our community, we're committed to moving beyond the land acknowledgements like I just gave, and where possible, into more meaningful partnerships and relationship buildings that actually acknowledges the history, the connection to, and the knowledge of the land in which we're situated. And we're all coming in today from different areas across Canada, and to be thankful and to acknowledge where we're coming, where we do our research. And our goal as FishCAST collectively is try to address systemic barriers in our fields and to work collaboratively to overcome them. At the end of the day, we are all, and we will all continue to be, treaty land inhabitants. So welcome everyone, bienvenue tout le monde, and Ani. But it's with my absolute pleasure to be able to introduce you today to our seminar speaker, Dr. Margaret Docker. Dr. Docker is a professor in the Department of Biological Sciences at the University of Manitoba, and she's extremely valued in her field. Dr. Docker's research interests include the conservation genetics of fishes, in particular lampreys, and the underappreciated freshwater fishes in Manitoba that we don't speak about enough, as well as the evolution of non-parasitism in lampreys, sex determination and sex differentiation in lampreys, as well as the use of environmental eDNA and DNA for monitoring of aquatic organisms. Margaret is the editor-in-chief of the journal Environmental Biology of Fishes, and she's actually edited already 2 volumes on the biology of lampreys for the Springer's, that's the editor, the Springer's Fish and Fisheries Service series. Dr. Docker has had and continues to have incredible impact in her field. So we heard from Dr. Nick Mandrak a couple of times, I think back in March when he gave a presentation, a member of FishCAST, both Dr. Mandrak and Dr. Docker. They serve as co-chairs of the Freshwater Fishes Subcommittee of COSEWIC. So COSEWIC stands for the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada. Margaret is also on the Great Lakes Fishery Commission Sea Lamprey Research Board, and she's part of GenFish. GenFish stands for the Genomic Network for Fish Identification, Stress, and Health. And this is a network team of researchers, professionals, and community members who are working to develop and validate genetic tools to be able to cost effectively assess both the location, the abundance, as well as the health of Canada's freshwater fishes. And of course, we are so happy to have Dr. Docker as a member of FishCAST, our community, which is the NSERC Create program, committed to training the next generation of fisheries and aquatic science leaders. One last item I would like to add about Dr. Docker is her unfailing efforts to make our community a more diverse and inclusive space. She works tirelessly to support and amplify, as well as bring to the table those who have been historically ignored and overlooked. She's a member on our CCFFR JEDI committee. So CCFFR stands for the Canadian Conference for Fisheries Research. JEDI is Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee. She's been so for the past 4 or 5 years. And she actually co-organized the very first diverse and inclusive CCFFR conference back in 2020 that has since then set the standard for all future FishCAST meetings. So that's our new society, which stands for the Society of Canadian Aquatic Sciences. She's served as both a mentor and an inspiration, not only to me, but to my fellow colleagues, and we are so grateful for her. And without further ado, I would like to now introduce her to what she's going to be talking to us about today, again, to just exemplify how she cares about those around her in the community and boosting voices. And the title of her talk today is Lessons Learned, Tips for ECRs on Scientific Writing. And if you could please join me in just welcoming Dr. Docker today. Thanks very much. Go ahead, Margaret, whenever you're ready.
Yes, well, thank you very much, Tina, that I was really excited about the possibility of talking to FishCAST and the broader community about scientific writing. This is something I'm very passionate about. After sort of volunteering for this, I then realized it's quite a feat to try to, in 30 minutes, sort of convey 35 years of experience on scientific writing. So this, of course, is going to be just the tip of the iceberg, but it's sort of a combination of cherry picking some of the important lessons I've learned over the years, as well as combining that with things that I wish I'd known earlier and that I think might be beneficial for early career researchers to know. So I'll be largely focusing on writing manuscripts for publication, but of course I'll be talking about tips for good writing in general. And as we all know, or are likely know, submitting manuscripts to peer-reviewed journals can be quite a roller coaster, but it's kind of what we do to share our work. Okay, so again, this 30 minutes won't be everything you'll ever need to know. There's lots of really good scientific writing resources out there. I've highlighted a few that I use and like. I'll be referring to some of the work by Joshua Schimmel in this Writing Science here. Dr. Stephen Hurd's The Scientist's Guide to Writing. I'm working my way through it right now, and there's also a number of resources specifically geared for non-native speakers of English. And if you even just quickly Google, tips for scientific writing, there's almost an endless supply of resources on the internet as well. And so, as I said, this isn't meant at all to be all-inclusive. What I will largely do is sort of draw on my experience first as sort of a student and early career researcher myself, and then more sort of the writer of manuscripts, reviewer of manuscripts, but largely drawing on my expertise and my experience as an editor. So I, over the course of about 10 years, edited 2 volumes on lampreys for Springer's Fish and Fisheries series, and then more recently my role as editor-in-chief of the journal Environmental Biology of Fishes. So I'll, in 30 minutes, try to sort of cobble together some tips that I hope will resonate with you, and either sort of both help you in your journey as you write, and maybe even more so get you excited about the notion of writing and sharing your work. So I'll just sort of start to sort of lay the groundwork for the things I'm going to try to talk about this morning, is maybe to first start to maybe counter some maybe general misconceptions that we also see. And when I say we, maybe these are things that I myself felt when I was first starting out. I'll hear undergraduates say, particularly when I assign them, say, an essay, I don't like writing. I went into science because I don't like writing. I didn't want to have to write, or I don't want a career in academia, so I don't need to know how to write. And as we'll see, and as I hope I will convince you, that regardless of what your future career paths are, good writing will always open doors for you. It doesn't have to be the great American novel, but clarity is key. Something that we all typically say, I know I said this myself as a grad student, well, I'm done my research and all I have to do now is just write it up. We often undervalue the writing process. We often don't devote enough time to it, and we have to recognize that it's hard, and it's part of the job, and we need to devote the energy and time to it. Another thing, that you may hear, or something to this effect, it's the content that matters, not how I present it, or, there's nothing wrong with it that can't get fixed during editing, or, the reviewers will take care of that. And I hope that I will quickly convince you that that's not the case, that will be your job. This is particularly the case in academic publishing. It might be different if you're submitting to a journal that has really hefty publication charges. If you're paying, $5,000 or $8,000 to have a paper published, maybe you get better copy editing. But for the most part, you have to be aware that there aren't a whole flock of editors that are carefully going through every manuscript. This is an example that some of you may have seen. It happened a few years ago. I can only assume that during the writing, one of the authors had put in the comment, should we cite the crappy Gabor paper here, in the parentheses. Maybe the lead author just went through and hit accept all when they were incorporating the revisions, and then it got missed at every step of the way, and this actually got published. So you can imagine how the lead authors on this, how uncomfortable it might have been at the next conference if they ran into Gabor, for example. And that's not, that dramatic is perhaps an exception, but it's quite frequent that errors will be missed during copy editing, or sometimes errors, and often errors, might get introduced during the copy editing process. So when you receive your page proofs, do read them carefully, because some of the automated formatting or style may introduce mistakes. In the first volume of my book on lampreys, there were 858 errors in the proofs. And those weren't errors that I missed, that I was very meticulous when I submitted it, but there was stuff that went on, sort of a global search and replace. Washington became Washington, D.C., so Pacific lamprey were found in California, Oregon, British Columbia, and Washington, D.C., so quite a disjunct distribution. Little things like when I was talking about American eel, anguilla, the copy editors thought that must be a mistake. I've repeated myself and took out one of the anguillas, and so that you can't assume that any of your errors will be fixed up during copy editing, and in fact, new ones might be introduced. So I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember the Only You Can Prevent Forest Fires campaign. Well, I think of that as sort of only you can prevent embarrassing mistakes. If you want to have that final paper that you're really proud of, then you can't rely on others to catch your mistakes. You need to really be diligent yourself. And often, and this is something I'm seeing a lot as editor-in-chief, often people don't pay close attention to the page proofs. It's only when they see their paper published online before it's incorporated into an issue that they notice mistakes. And published online is published, and so that it's too late at that point to correct mistakes without actually publishing an erratum. So it is possible if there are errors that need to be corrected, but it's not just sort of seamlessly and quietly corrected in the original. And then the last sort of thing that I will address towards the end of this morning's talk is just about the peer review process. And so many of you may hear, like your thesis advisor or others lamenting about being asked to review so many manuscripts for journals, and you're thinking, wow, I wish I got an invitation to review a manuscript for a journal. You can. I know with environmental biology of fishes, we always really want to bring more early career researchers into the reviewer pool. So I'll talk more about that, and definitely contact me if you think that environmental biology of fishes would be sort of a good venue for you. Okay, so I'll just backtrack a little bit and talk a little bit more about, why is it important? And this is something that I certainly had to sort of come to terms with myself as a graduate student. The research isn't done until you've shared it. I was most excited as a student about doing the hands-on work. Once I'd finished that last experiment, sort of answered the question to my satisfaction, I thought I was done, that I wanted to get on to the next experiment and sort of begrudged the time it took to write it up. But having all the data in your computer in a binder on your shelf doesn't do the field, the discipline any good. So it's important that you share it. Important for you personally, important for the field, important to the granting agency that's paid for the work, and also important to sort of the future lab members to increase the success of future research proposals. So once I recognized that it was an obligation, part of the research, that helped me a little bit, but even more than recognizing that it was an obligation, once I also saw it as an opportunity, that helped me sort of embrace the writing process rather than just do it begrudgingly. And so it really is an exciting opportunity to share your work, to share some unique insights, and it's also a really valuable opportunity to deepen your understanding. That even though when I finished that last experiment, I thought, okay, now I understand it. It wasn't until I tried to sort of write it up, explain it to a wider audience, really sort of put it in a concise manner, my understanding really deepened. And so it's amazing what is often seen as the final step, how it really can be an opportunity to deepen your understanding. And maybe this is, particularly important for early career researchers. And I'm not just talking about, graduate students who are trying to put, papers on your CV for the next position, but for undergraduates as well. Being able to write well will open many doors for you. And conversely, I guess having an aversion to writing will likely close many doors. My first job ever in science was right out of first year university at CCIW, Canada Centre for Inland Waters in Burlington, that they were looking for someone to do a lit review, and I was able to provide them with some sample writings from first year, and it was a great opportunity for me. All of the classes I teach have writing assignments associated with them, because I think it's such an important skill to have, regardless of what you end up doing career-wise, and some of the other opportunities that can come from that. Just to highlight one here, two students, Justin Budick and Anthony Whiteman, who took courses with me and worked with me, co-wrote a CSIWIC status report with Doug Watkinson and me on Northern Brook and Silver Lamprey. So you don't necessarily have to be aiming for that faculty position. Being able to write well will just open so many doors. And this is particularly the case when you're writing grant proposals. If there's ever a time to be articulate and convincing and to make the reader's job easy, it's when you're asking for money. So even though I'm largely focusing on peer-reviewed manuscripts in this talk, being able to write well when you're asking for money is critical. And that applies to scholarship applications as well. Okay, so it's never too early to start. As I indicated, that I have all of the students in my undergraduate classes do writing exercises. As an undergrad, as a grad student, there's lots of opportunities for you to hone your writing skills. Something that a lot of people like to do and that works quite well is peer writing circles, and so that you're getting feedback on a regular basis from your peers, whether it's working on your proposal for your thesis or your thesis itself, or whether you just have sort of weekly or bi-weekly writing exercises just to sort of keep you in the habit of writing and getting feedback. It's really valuable. Something else, and this sort of ties back into what I was saying about the job opportunity I had with DFO as an undergrad myself, I would really encourage you to keep a portfolio of unpublished writing samples. So let's say you've written an essay or a report, lab report for an undergraduate class. You get your feedback. Even if you don't have to hand it back in again, don't just sort of look at the mark and file it or toss it. When you have the opportunity, work through the comments, make revisions, and then you've got a polished essay or writing sample that you can have handy if a prospective employer or supervisor wants to see something. You can go even one step further, and there are many opportunities to publish, including as undergraduates. I'm not sure what different universities have, but the University of Manitoba has an undergraduate journal, PMuser, the Proceedings of Manitoba's Undergraduate Science and Engineering Research, and it's a really good opportunity for undergrads to experience the peer review process and have a peer-reviewed publication. And so every year, students in my second year Cord 8 biology class write an essay on a topic of their choice. And every year, at least a few of the students submit their essays to PMuser and have them published, which is really nice to see. And if you want to go even one step further, many journals, I would say almost all of them, have categories that include review papers or brief communications. And so if you've done a nice meaty literature review, for example, for your thesis, there's a good opportunity for you to prepare that for publication in a peer-reviewed manuscript. Or the brief communications are usually very small studies that might be a bit more preliminary in nature, but that are very timely or significant. And so there's lots of opportunities to publish even before you get to sort of that final, okay, I've finished my thesis, I'm ready to disseminate the results. And so, as I said, that we often think of writing as an afterthought, but you really have to give writing the time and effort that it deserves. And so one thing that I found was really critical was I had to find a schedule that worked for me and an approach that worked for me. So it's different for different people, but for me, I do my best writing in the morning. If I try to do some writing at the end of a very busy day, it's not going to be very productive. So even when my daughter was young, I would get up, at quite early in the morning so I could get in a couple of hours of writing before she got up. I'd leave, I'd email off, sit at the dining room table with my cup of coffee and just try to take advantage of those first few hours of the day where I really was motivated and was able to write. And then, later in the day, I might, work with figures or tables, references, something that required less sort of mental investment, but that worked for me. And then the other thing too that I discovered was that, even if I could work in the lab 8 or 10 hours without breaking a sweat, I could not write for 8 to 10 hours at a stretch. And so it would be much better to write, 4 weeks, half days, rather than trying to work, write full time for 2 weeks. And so you really do have to find a schedule that works and then make time to write. The other thing that was a big breakthrough for me, and some of you may have discovered this earlier than I did, was that you have to be able to break big tasks into small, achievable steps. This example here, that was a chapter on the lamprey gonad that I wrote with several colleagues for the Springer lamprey book. The chapter ended up being well over 100 pages. If I sort of sat down every morning thinking, oh no, I have to work on a 100-page chapter, I wouldn't even know where to start. And so once I sort of broke it down into the different sections, it became very manageable. So I'd get up one morning and it's just like, okay, I'm going to work on section 1.2.4, sex ratio during the parasitic feeding phase. It was very manageable, and, you chip away at it, and before you know, you have, 150 pages. And then you got to stick with it. Again, this is something that I learned as a graduate student. I would often wait for inspiration to strike when I was a graduate student, and I would sit down and it's just like, oh, I must have a writer's block. I just don't feel it. I'll come back at it tomorrow. I'll be more efficient if I'm really into it tomorrow. And so, but I soon came to learn that, you have to sort of approach it with the build it and they will come sort of a philosophy that if you sit down to write and you stick with it, you'll start chipping away, and, slow and steady wins the race. And then the other thing I can't emphasize enough is learn by example. I've never taken any formal writing courses. I've just you just sort of learn as you go by paying attention to what you like and learning from example. So the best place likely to start, and maybe the most important place to learn by example, is by looking at papers in your field. How are they structured? How are they written? How do the figures and tables complement the text, and so on. But you don't have to restrict yourself to papers in your field. I mean, any authors that you admire, one of the most important ways to learn to write is by reading. And so two authors that I like, Stephen Jay Gould, who wrote science for the informed layperson, or even, novelists as well. And sometimes it's just even a matter of, how do they construct the sentence? How do they use semicolons? I mean, just really paying attention. We're scientists. We should be able to observe things carefully. So just sort of paying attention and learning by example. And you can often learn as much from a bad example as you can from a good example. So don't just pay attention to the good papers that you like. Also, if you come across a paper that you find very hard to follow, ask yourself, what is sort of bad about this? What is impeding my ability to understand it? And then perhaps that's something that you can avoid yourself in the future. It's the same, I think, with oral presentations. Often, there's people who may know their field very well, but if the presentation isn't delivered at the right level, or it's disorganized, it's not necessarily a good talk. And so we can sort of learn about what pitfalls to avoid as well. And these are things that I try to communicate to the students in the classes that I'm teaching about, learn by example, emulate those good examples, and also learn from the mistakes of others, even if it's a simple matter of, in my list of sort of common grammar mistakes to watch out for, as you see common errors that people sort of common pitfalls that people fall into, my list of things to myself and for others to watch out for grows. And critical to this, of course, is to know your audience, that how you frame your study is going to depend entirely on the audience. And very definitely if you're talking to lay people versus scientists, but even within a discipline, whether you frame the research more broadly or more specific is going to be important. So in a couple of examples here is work from my lab. So in this example, this was a paper looking at the absence of natal homing in Pacific lamprey, submitted to Molecular Ecology, which is a broader journal. So we didn't start, very first sentence talking about lampreys. We had to work our way up to lampreys. So the first paragraph talks about other species with long migration distances that show a certain degree of philopatry or homing. Second paragraph, then we sort of narrow in a little bit more to anadromous fishes. And then it's the third paragraph, then we say that lampreys may be an exception to the rule of homing in anadromous fishes. That was different with a paper that was submitted to Journal of Fish Biology. So we already know that the readership is going to be interested in fish. And so in the very first sentence, then we can jump right into talking about lampreys. And that would be very different then too if you're whether it's a journal that would publish more fundamental science or whether the emphasis is more on applied science. So this was a paper submitted to management of biological invasions, where the emphasis was on using sea lamprey environmental DNA to estimate relative abundance. And so we start then by outlining the management problem that we're trying to solve with our method. And so that's important when you're submitting to a journal, and then it's critically important when you're asking for money. If you're applying to an NSERC discovery grant type of program, you're looking more at fundamental science versus other programs. So what we do, and you've probably heard about this sort of typical hourglass shape of a paper where you start your introduction with this broader context, and then you narrow down to your specific question, outlining how your specific question will help answer that broader question. And then at the end, you sort of open back out again, interpreting your specific results in that broader context. What often happens, particularly as students, we get so focused on the specifics of our own question, we often forget to sort of step back and make sure that it's framed in a broader context. I know particularly say when some of my students are writing scholarship applications, I say my advice is, okay, pretend that the reader, and maybe it's not a lot of pretending involved, doesn't give a crap about lampreys. So don't start with, very first sentence about lampreys, start with a broader context to let them know why work on lampreys, for example, might be important. So don't get so lost in the weeds that you don't forget that you forget the broader context. And then the question often is, how widely should you cast your net in that introduction? Well, ultimately, you should only cast it as wide as you can actually deliver on. So the book that I was referring to, Writing Science by Joshua Schimmel, he says you need to be able to deliver on your promise, that the specific question is relevant to a broader question. And I often joke, in our department, the PhD candidacy exam involves the students writing a discovery grant styled proposal, which involves a statement of impact. And I often joke that students that are doing molecular research always say that it will help find the cure for cancer, and students doing ecological work say that it will help us combat climate change. Those are probably a little bit too broad of a context that we have to make sure that we can deliver on our promises. And saying that it's relevant without showing sort of the concrete substance to illustrate that relevance accomplishes little. So we have to make sure that it's not too broad. We want to be able to deliver. And so when we're writing, we have to sort of simultaneously think of both the pickiest of readers and reviewers in mind, and also keep in mind that many of our eventual readers will only be sort of half attentive. And so for the very thorough readers, the reviewers who will read it start to finish, it's important that we edit, proofread to make sure that we've really made sure that it's cleanly written. Proofreading is really hard because, if you've spent weeks or months working on something, it's really hard to read what's there instead of what you think is there. So Stephen Hurd had a number of really good suggestions in his book that I really liked, that he suggested, using a different medium when you're proofreading. I know that many of you probably read it aloud as a way of trying to maybe pick up some of those errors you wouldn't have seen if you were just reading through it. But Dr. Hurd also suggests, reading it in a different font, or printing it out, just so that you aren't reading exactly what you've read already. And I thought that was really useful. And then what would be the most useful, I think, would be to have somebody else read it. So your co-authors, anybody. I know that often I'll have my daughter or my sister read things to make sure that there aren't silly mistakes there that I just can't see anymore. So that's the more pickier of the readers. We also have to remember that a lot of readers are going to be only half attentive, and that's not an insult to them. How many of us really read a paper start to finish? I know that I often spot read papers, and so I'll read the abstract, the introduction. I'll look at the display items, the tables and the figures, and then maybe the beginning and the end of the discussion. And so you really want to make sure that the key information is found in those locations. One thing I hate to see in an abstract is that the abstract is essentially in all the background, and then when you're just getting to reporting the results of your study, all it says is, and the results will be discussed. I mean, that's fine, kind of expected if you're submitting an abstract for a conference and you haven't finished doing all of your analyses yet, but you will by the time the conference rolls around. We sort of expect to see that. But in a paper, I really want to be told what the key findings are in the abstract. I don't want to just be teased with what would be in the paper. And I really liked how Schimmel sort of phrased it, don't blow the punchline. You really want to make sure that when you get to the discussion, you've got those key points there. Yeah, and sort of following an adage from journalism about don't bury the lead. The same goes in the discussion. So the discussion sometimes, or at least on the first draft, the tendency is to sort of restate the question and sort of work our way up in the same order that we did it in the results to the big findings. But that means then that the key findings are going to be buried somewhere in the discussion that readers might not find it. So I always like to start with that overarching sentence in the discussion that sort of sets the stage, and so that if people don't read the full discussion, they've at least got the core ideas there. And then something that I really liked from Schimmel's book is, principle one of writing is it's the author's job to make the reader's job easy. And so it may take multiple drafts for you to craft your original ideas into an idea that is easier for the reader to digest. And so one of the things that I thought was quite powerful here was, the statement that, simple ideas, which are different from simplistic ideas, have power. And by simple ideas, we mean sort of that it really contains the core essence of the important idea. And I know when I'm writing, the first, the second, the third draft, I haven't really got to that core idea yet, and it takes multiple drafts of rewriting it until I fully understand it well enough to make sure that core idea is coming across in a clear way. And as he says, it takes no special talent to see the complex in the complex. It's cutting through the clutter to see the simple in the complex that's key. And just a few other things, and I realize that I've underestimated how much time I might take to go through this. I'll try not to belabor a lot of this, but some other really important things that come out when you're editing to really make sure that your message is coming across clearly is, the value of having that sort of topic sentence at the beginning of every paragraph. And if you sort of have the topic sentence and then with some further explanation of that, it really is an effective way. And the reader could even sort of just skip along reading just the first sentence of each paragraph to get the essence of the story. Other things that we should probably, I'm sure already aware of, but to avoid jargon, or if you need to use terminology, you can define it in a subtle, concise way. You don't have to have, sentence after sentence being an explicit definition, but just make sure that the terminology is at least subtly explained. And we tend to do this, at least in our first few drafts, that we use fuzzy language, that, like we say things like that in the introduction, that we're doing the study because little is known about the topic. Well, just because little is known isn't really good enough. That what specifically don't we know, and why is it important to know it? Or even just the words that we use, that metabolism, was affected by temperature, or something like that, without any additional words. If we use a more precise verb, it helps. It helps in a concise way make sure that we're clear. And I love this sort of idea. I would have made it shorter if I'd had more time. That very rarely is our first draft concise. We tend to write more as we're kind of figuring things out. And once we've figured it out, then we can make it more concise. And so I like sort of thinking of it this way. When you're trying to make something more concise, first you prune the big limbs. You sort of take out the material that just doesn't need to be there at all. Maybe it's not particularly relevant to the specific story, or it's redundant. And then what remains, then you sort of shake out the dead leaves to tidy up the writing to make sure that what remains is clear and concise. And some of the sort of targets for the delete key include that sort of meta discourse, the discussing the discussion sort of thing, where we found that in this study, and so on. Or a lot of other empty filler that is often there in our first few drafts that obscures the main point. And so it's always a bit of a challenge to find the right balance between bloated and cryptic. You don't want to strip down the writing so much that you lose the flow and the coherence. And I'm a big fan of words like likewise, however, in contrast, similarly, so that it's not just a bunch of sort of disjointed ideas that are down on the page that I'm helping the reader sort of move through it. Yes, these results supported my hypothesis. However, this was in contrast, so that they aren't having to every sentence figure out how that fits into the story. And then sort of as I'm getting more to the manuscript writing, and this is more sort of my advice as an editor-in-chief. One thing I will say is, you should be able to count on help from your co-authors. So there's sort of comics like this out there that I hope is largely joking in terms of what the contribution is of different people on a multi-authored paper. My feeling is, of course, anybody who is an author on a paper should have contributed, and so that there shouldn't be some of these, I hope, tongue-in-cheek comments. This is, I think, really critical particularly as a student, to realize when you go from writing a thesis where you're the sole author on your thesis. I mean, obviously your supervisor has contributed immensely, your committee has also contributed, but still, your name is the only one on the thesis, that it will largely represent your efforts with editing and guidance. When you're submitting a manuscript to a journal and you have other co-authors, if your supervisor, for example, is a co-author, then you can count on them, and you should be able to count on them for more specific editing help. As difficult as it is to finish your thesis, have it pass through defense and incorporate the revisions, almost always it still isn't ready for peer review, that in most cases further editing and refining will be required, and this is where you can really draw on help from your co-authors. And so most research groups, most journals have guidelines for contribution in authorship, and they're, the actual writing isn't the only way to contribute intellectually to a paper, but being involved in that, the writing, revisions, editing is an important part of it. And then something else that, despite the name editor, most journal editors generally don't edit, not that line by line, correcting of errors, restructuring sentences to make them clearer. When I was editor of these two books, I did, but that I worked with the authors for every chapter to make sure everything was consistent, and polished. But it took about 10 years for these two volumes to be written, start to finish. With the number of manuscripts that pass through a journal, believe me, I do not do the same level of editing. I certainly try to help as much as I can, particularly for early career researchers or for researchers whose first language isn't English. But I just don't have the time to do that. If there's a more senior author on a paper, I'm expecting that the senior author is helping the junior author with that sort of editing. And as much as I'd like to help, I typically only help when I think that the authors have done the best they can themselves. So if I see that there's a lot of errors in a PDF. I'll open up the Word document version of it. And if I see all sorts of underlining that suggests that the author hasn't paid much attention or any attention to spell check or grammar check, then I'm a little bit less forgiving. And just another reminder too, reference management software is fabulous. It saves so much time for having to, type in all your references, but don't sort of just incorporate the output uncritically, that there's almost always manual editing that will be required to make sure that it's more polished. And as I said already, as sad as it is, we can't really count on the copy editors, that you have to make sure that those things are taken care of yourself, that they don't get cleaned up in much in the production process. And it's not fair, I'll add as well, to expect reviewers to edit your manuscript for you. They're volunteers, they're anonymous. It's your job to do a lot of that editing. And I also want to counteract. I mean, you've probably seen various tweets and memes about the dreaded reviewers, particularly reviewer 2, that somehow reviewers are these mean people out there who all they want to do is crush what was a perfectly, perfect manuscript. Don't think of it that way, that overwhelmingly most reviewers are very generous with their time, offering constructive feedback. Reviewers are your friend, help them help you. If you submit a manuscript that is as polished as you can get it before it's then evaluated by them for scientific content, then you'll be much happier with the final result. I've never had a manuscript that hasn't been substantially improved by the review process. Even if I first bristle when I get the reviews back and I think, what? How could they not have seen that it was perfect as it was? And then I start reading the comments and I'm just like, oh yeah, that's a really good point. And by the time I've revised it, I'm just like, wow, yeah, that was really great. And just again, if we appreciate that most reviewers are offering advice to help improve a manuscript, I try not to treat the response to the reviewers as a rebuttal letter. That don't fire off that rebuttal letter within 24 hours. Sit with the comments first and see whether or not you think that there is some validity to what they say, instead of just arguing with their points. That the response to the reviewers, there will be some times that you disagree with what they've suggested, and you can indicate why. But the main reason for a response to reviewers is to facilitate re-review, so they don't have to start at the very beginning again and try to see, okay, did they incorporate this? Did they do that? What is different? What is new? And so that, go through and let them know what you changed, where they can find it to facilitate that process. And then one final thing I'll add with respect to that, if there's something that they didn't understand, it might be that maybe they just missed it and it was perfectly clear, but often maybe they didn't understand it because it wasn't as clear as it could be. So don't spend half a page in your response to reviewers explaining it to that one reviewer. See if you can improve it and clarify it in the manuscript. If they didn't understand it when they were reading it thoroughly, then probably subsequent readers wouldn't either. So it's frustrating when I see a 10-page response to reviewers letter and there's not a thing that's different in the manuscript. And to quote my high school chemistry teacher, when all else fails, follow instructions. Take a look at the instructions to authors on the journal website. I know that some of them are quite dense, and so I've put together a one-page author checklist for environmental biology of fishes that includes not just frequently asked questions, but frequently made mistakes to try to avoid those. And if I haven't put you off of this process at all, and you're excited to write a manuscript, perhaps even a review of material that you're already reviewing for your thesis, and you think that environmental biology of fishes would be a good venue for you, I encourage you to take a look at the website. It's a very sort of broad journal in terms of anything that has to do with the relationship between fish and their environment is appropriate for the journal. We try to turn manuscripts around fairly quickly, so 54 days on average from submission to first decision, although we try not to do that by harassing the reviewers. We try to give reviewers the time they deserve to submit a good and thorough review without interfering with the many other things they have to do in their daily job. And one thing I'm particularly proud of with environmental biology of fishes is the expansion to our editorial board. So I took over as editor-in-chief in March of 2021, and so within the first 4 to 6 months, really trying to expand the editorial board, partly to have sort of more hands on deck, so that all of the volunteers on the editorial board aren't being asked to sacrifice other parts of their jobs and their lives to do this, but also to have a more diverse editorial board in an attempt to sort of have the gatekeepers of the publication process better reflect the demographics of our international readership, and not just sort of what it is currently, but the ideal demographics of our discipline. And so at present now we have 50 advisory editors from 16 countries and 5 continents, and also made a conscious effort to include diversity in career stage. So we have some early career researchers on the editorial board, a diversity of language background, and close to 40% of the advisory editors are women. And we have 7 advisory editors from Canada. Many names here on the list you'll recognize, and I know at least one of them is here with us today. They've all been really instrumental in helping us make this a more inclusive journal. And again, if you aren't wanting to run screaming from the whole peer review process, and you're interested in serving as a reviewer on a manuscript, please contact me. We love to have more early career researchers in the reviewer pool. And even if you feel that you're still quite inexperienced, don't let that stop you. That what I often do in that case then is, rather than just having 2 peer reviewers on a manuscript, I will still have the 2 more experienced reviewers, and then a third ECR reviewer. So then that way it gives you an opportunity to learn the process without feeling the pressure of producing the type of review that would be expected of a more experienced person. And I'll stop there. I apologize that I've run longer than planned, but I hope there's still time for questions.
Thank you so much, Margaret. That was amazing and really, really informative. And I was actually taking screenshots because you're giving such good pieces of advice. I really, really thank you for that. We'll stop recording.